Hello everyone, this is False Mamba Books here, and I'm here to talk about Deadhouse Gates. Now, this is the second Malazan Book of the Fallen book, and I gotta say, this is a weird one for me. This is the second one, and I was hooked by the first one. I loved the first book, even though, admittedly, looking back, it had some structural problems. I liked it all throughout. Great book. But this one was interesting because of it's also structured a little bit weird. The second one opens with a nice long stretch of character introductions and setting, and because we're getting to know a new continent, Seven Cities, and I love it. I loved it. Honestly, Seven Cities is I probably prefer Seven Cities over Genabacchus, but that is to say, this book set up the tense atmosphere that was to come in the rest of the book really well. It talked about the rebellion, and I was like, okay, so maybe that's like the climax of the book. They finally do all this stuff, and then the rebellion happens. And then Callum starts taking the book to the holy desert, Raraku, and it's like, oh, and then you look at part two's name, and you're like, oh, and then it starts to happen. And I gotta say that genuinely one of my favorite passages in this whole series is the whirlwind itself, the immediate carnage that seeps into the entire story through that one little thing. It's so amazing. I loved reading that part of the book. That being said, I think that after the chain of dogs, right? I found that Duiker's chapters could be a little dry, a little too, I guess, frequent. Like, you'll see, I'll tell you specific complaints when I get into the character POVs. I'm going to go over a bunch of them and tell how I like the characters and such. But the Chain of Dogs, and then the ending was so satisfying. My problem with the first book is that the ending was a bit underwhelming. Like, not bad, just my expectations were not met because that's not like the book's fault, but that's my fault. My expectations were not what that Erickson was going to do, and it didn't meet my expectation. That's okay. That is totally fine. But this lived up to it. This ending, this book. Now, I say all that, and but I enjoyed my time with this book. Now, looking back on it, I love this book so much more than I did when I first read it. It is so good. I love it. I love almost everything about it. But now getting into some of the character POVs, we're going to start off with Akarium and Mappo. I'm going to lump a bunch of these guys together because this book is kind of the most self-contained book in the entire series. I'm on book 5 right now. But it is about a few groups of people surviving this horrific event in Seven Cities. One of these people who aren't surviving, but they don't even know what's going on, are Akarium and Mappo. Now, Akarium is a half-blooded Jagut called a Jag, and he is traveling with his companion, Mappo Trell, or Mappo Runt. His name is Mappo Runt. But I'll probably be calling him Mappo Trell because that's what they call him throughout the book, and that's what his name is in my head. And these guys are it's such a beautiful friendship that they display. I loved every single moment they were on screen, especially when they're just alone and they have their quiet chats and their moments to themselves. It's so good. I loved every moment of them, and I cannot wait to read more about them. And the next person is Felicin. I don't know. But she is such an interesting character because I can see how a lot of people would be like, this girl is so annoying, bro. Because, she is, but not in an ignorant sense. Erickson was not unaware of his character writing. He was very aware that he was writing someone who could be deemed unlikable because she is just, she's a kid. She's, I think, 15 in this book, or what was it? Yeah, 15. And she goes through so much abuse, so much trauma, and the people who try to help her, she can't realize that they're trying to help her, and she just pushes them away at every turn, and they don't leave her. And it's it's a tragic story, but it's almost more beautiful for it, because she starts like high up, and we hear about her in the first book, and then she's brought down to earth, and she has to kind of not learn to trust again, but her Haboric and what's his name, Baudin, that traveling companion, those, I love that too. Every time they were on screen, I was like, nice. And it was a lot of wandering the desert, though. That's the thing, is this book is a lot of wandering around, and not a lot of, I guess, action. And by action, I mean like character on character action, not army on army, which there's a lot of that. Next, I want to talk about Fiddler. Now, Fiddler is my favorite character in the entire series as of book 5. I love him. You have people like Animander Rake and Whiskey Jack and and Perrin and like Tool, and I love Tool. I love Animander Rake as much as the next guy, but personally, my heart is with Fiddler and his like reluctant father or protector. I really saw it as a kind of a father figure to Absalar and Crocus, who are kids and are traveling this like hellscape, and he has to protect them, and it's nice. There's just something about him being so compassionate to these kids, and like he's smart and capable. And I forget if it was him or Hedge that blew up Raced in the last book, but when when he first appears, and you have that little like that big sea monster thing, and he blows it up, I was genuinely creeped out by the description. I have thalassophobia, which is fear of like deep oceans, and that generally creeped me out. And so when he shot him, I was like, thank you, Fid, you're doing the best. So Fid is still my favorite character by far. And next up is Crocus and Absalar. I'll put those two together because they're together throughout all of this book, and those guys are just so damn cute that you want to root for them. But I know this is going to turn out to be a tragedy. It's one of those things where like Erikson, not like a tragedy, not in the Felicen sense, but like in the grand arc, we're heading into the tragic portion of the arc, and I'm like, just let them be happy. They're so cute together. Like the way Crocus just stands up for Absalar at every single turn, and like how Absalar is figuring herself out, and Crocus is also figuring himself out. And because in the first book, Crocus, I found that like he was like, because he was given something from Alpon as well as Perrin was, but Perrin clearly seemed to be of importance. Well, him as the coin bearer was just kind of like, meh, eh. So him in this book a lot better, and I just love it. Now, next person, I might have a controversial opinion here, is Callum. Now, I think the decision to split Callum from Fid, Absalar, and Crocus, well, completely understandable for what Erikson wanted to achieve with the book, was probably my least favorite decision out of the whole book, because I thought that it was so interesting that he had to initiate the whirlwind, but after that, I kind of really didn't like his chapters. Now, I think I like Callum as a character whenever he's with Quickben or Pearl or, all these other characters. So good. But when he's alone, it's like, damn, give me something else to work with here. Next person is Duiker. Now, Duiker, because he's such a prominent part and such a different part from everyone else, like he has such a unique stance in this entire series, especially in this book, like a unique plot structure, I guess, where he is the main character of this book. I have mixed feelings because some of his chapters were really fun. All of them that included like Blut, Sormo, Coltane, Nil, Nether, just so good. It's so good. But when he was alone or when there was a battle, I specifically remember chapter 10 was just hard to get through. I was flying through the book, and I read this book in a week, by the way. I was flying through it, and then I hit chapter 10, and I almost was like, oh no, am I going to be able to continue this series? Like, this is bad. And then I got through it, and then it picked up again, but that almost slumped me. That almost did me in. It was military movements, and this is military fantasy through and through. And I am new to military fantasy, and I get that this is a part of it. I'm not criticizing Erickson for doing that. I'm just saying that as a reader, my interests were not piqued during this chapter and during a lot of those battle sequences. I thought the focus of like the entire book being dedicated to the march, one thing I didn't like about that is that we didn't get I don't want to say we because I can't speak for everyone, but I did not get a very good sense of time. Time was like, it took them months, and I didn't feel the months. Like it just, every now and then they'd just say something offhand like, oh yeah, it's been a few months since Aaron, or since the first city they escaped from, and I'm like, really? Okay. But Duiker, his endgame was so good. Him saving all the refugees, but ultimately being done in by someone else's, like by the guy who we've been talking about all book, he's just horrible, and finally being done in by him is tragic. But him having the bottle and being saved by Baruch from Drujistan, very interesting. See, this book and the next book make me very sad that we only get to go back to Drujistan like properly in book 8, because I love Drujistan. I think that Genabacchus as a continent is less interesting than Seven Cities as a continent, but like city to city, Drujistan is the single most entertaining like city area for me, because we spend all of book 1 there, and it has such a unique vibe, and like it's such a classic D&D vibe throughout the whole book. Next person is Baldin. I liked Baldin, except for one massive thing. When he had sex with Felicen, tests my patience to this day. I pretend I don't remember that. I pretend that didn't happen, and the book is much better for it, and he is much better for it. But he did, and I can't get over that. I thought his stuff with the Talon was very vague, and it wasn't until later books that I realized how important that all actually was. And I mean, that's kind of what it's supposed to do, though. It's supposed to lay the groundwork, but it's one of those things where it didn't seem like a mystery that needed to be solved. It just kind of seemed like I didn't catch it on my first read through. It was only afterwards I was like, oh, okay, yeah, he's a Talon. Okay. I actually had to search it up on the wiki. I was like, what does that mean? Oh, he's a Talon. I didn't know what a Talon meant, but like, okay, sure, he's a Talon. Whenever I see it, the term Talon thrown around, I'll be like, Baldin. Okay. Next person is Kulp. Kulp is the cadre mage from the same area that Coltane exited from, and he got on with Gessler, Stormy, and Truth. And honestly, I did like him when he was there, but he's not around for the whole series. He dies in this book, and like I read this book about a month ago now, and I cannot remember much of him. Like, he doesn't stick in my mind as much as some of the other people who have appeared in this book and haven't appeared in any others. Yeah, like, he's good for what he does in the story, but after he's gone, it's like, okay, cool. Next person is Iskral Pust. Now, I don't know if this is controversial in the fandom, but I have liked Karuk. I love Karuk, and I like Iskral Pust. I like Eriksson's crazy characters, his kooky characters, because when he writes those, he can be as cryptic as he wants, and I cannot understand them, and that's by design. And I'm allowed to be like, okay, so you're speaking in riddles, okay. Because the other characters are usually also very confused as to what he's saying, and that makes me feel validated in my confusion. Like I said in my last video, there is two different types, like there's a few different types of confusion. When the reader is confused and when the characters are confused, that is when you're allowed to just allow yourself to be confused, because not even the people you're reading about know. So what's the harm in letting yourself just get off a little bit? Now, another duo is Gessler and Stormy. Now, in this book, they don't really come into their own. That's not until book 4. But in this book, what we do get is very entertaining. I guess it's Gessler, Stormy, and Truth. So I'll just include them as a trio, but particular Gessler and Stormy are like, they've been together a lot longer than Truth, and what ends up happening to them with their kind of accidental ascendancy is almost hilarious, because the thing, I want to make a video about this, but I think that the way that ascendancy as a concept is introduced into the series is very, very good. I think it builds upon itself, and Eriksson builds it up slowly, layer by layer, as to you get a feeling of what this means, right? And Gessler and Stormy are kind of the second layer to that. After Anomander Rake, you get this, and it continues to build in later books, and it's just such a layered topic that these guys fit perfectly into. So they're interesting to read about. They're interesting to read about as well as fun to read about, which is like the best combination. So these guys get a thumbs up from me. Next person is Pearl. Now, I liked Pearl in this book. He's another character that I think comes into his own in other books, but in this book, he is very competent and he's charismatic, and that's the thing, is like he's allowed to be a bit. He lies to Callum. He has that whole section where he lies to Callum, and he is playing a part, and that's all good and great. And when he stabs Callum, I mean, it's one of those things where I'm not mad at him. I like Callum. Again, I like him as a character, but I think that the drama that he provided and the duo of Pearl and Callum on the ship was what made that section actually remotely interesting and fun to read. Basically, from when he gets on the ship to when he to the end of the book, I think that that's Callum's second best section after delivering the book The Apocalypse. And Pearl is a big part of that, because he just gives him someone to bump off of, because Callum is like best as not part of a duo, but he's just best in the presence of other people. And that's true with a lot of characters in fiction, but in this series in particular, Callum is that character. Now, the next person is Coltane. And going and reading some of the hype for Coltane, I can't say I share the tippy top. Like, some people are way up here, and I'm probably like there, right? Really love the character. He's such an interesting and layered person, and the different sides you get to see, because all the time we're seeing him from Duiker's eyes, and Duiker gets to see him in private with his friends, in public as the leader of the chain of dogs, and like in all these different scenarios, and it slowly builds up to this larger than life figure, and you get to see him as his common soldiers see him, but you also get to see him as Duiker sees him, as, just a guy who's trying his best. And I'll take this opportunity to talk about the Crow Clan and the Wiccans. I thought that, like, the idea of their souls being transferred from crows, and the whole ending scene with the horde of crows, because you have Sormo, where he needed the guy who his soul inhabits. He needed 3 crows, and Coltane's soul is so vast, his power is so vast, that he needs this many crows. It's just a beautiful scene. Him, when he gets crucified and shot by the soldier, I forget his name, Slick or something, anyways. It's just such a brutal scene, and it's one of the most iconic scenes that, like, I've ever read. Like, that, I know that's going to influence me when it comes to my writing. That's one of those scenes where, like, I put a pin in it and I'm like, that is such an influential scene. Coltane, amazing. Now I want to talk about Nil and Nether and Sormo, kind of as a trio, because they're the main warlocks. And I think that introducing Sormo first and having him be like, okay, so he's going to be the the mage, and having him die kind of not midway through the story, but midway through the chain of dogs was, or kind of in the beginning of the final stretch, was such a nice thing, because it handily passed the torch on to Nil and Nether. Nil and Nether, yeah. And I love them. I love those characters because they're just the kids at the end of the day. Just like it's like the same appeal that Felice and Crocus and Apslar have. They're just kids who have this immense weight put on them because of who they are. Who they're basically circumstances beyond their control. Sure, the souls of past warlocks inhabit them, but do you think that those kids chose, like, because those kids are kids and then they communicate with the soul, like they're not the same thing. It's not the soul took over the body, it's that they have a mind of their own, they have to commune. It's tragic. This book is filled with tragedy. The next person is Blut, Uncle Blut. Fantastic character. Every time he's on screen, loved him. And next I want to talk about this because the first book, Gardens of the Moon, was super, super fantasy. It was super, super kind of, you could tell the D&D influence. And I think that, like, this book, Deadhouse Gates, shattered that, like, it took the idea that this was just going to be your normal average kind of D&D retelling and shattered that with its brutality and detail into this violent uprising that occurred. And I was like, this is really dark. This is really dark. The third book is a bit darker in certain topics, but like overall this is the darker book. Like, it's just so brutal. The whirlwind is probably my favorite single sequence in this book is that whirlwind, that initial rip through of the cities, and how it's just he describes the slaughter of children and all of this stuff. It's just brutal, and it works so well to build this atmosphere, this desert of, like, it kind of makes those cities being so filled with blood and death makes the desert seem almost appealing, right? Like, there's a lot of wandering going through the desert, but at least you're not having to read about bodies upon bodies and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for my thoughts on Deadhouse Gates. I just want to thank everyone who watched the previous video on Gardens of the Moon. That is a video that I put no promotion into. Usually with my other YouTube channel, I promote the videos on Twitter and stuff, and this channel, I'm just gonna kind of let it sink or swim. This is just me ranting about books. I don't need to make anything out of this channel. It can make stuff for itself. You know, it'll make stuff for itself. People watch that video, and I really appreciate it. And I've gained a few subscribers, and I've gotten nice comments on it. So thank you. And I just wish you all a good day. And I just note I will be making videos on the next book. Someone asked me that, and I will. Bye.